Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 116. I'm Jim Cornell and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. Today, among other things, we are talking about biotech and space with two guests from the company LinkGevity, and they are sisters. Carina Kern is the CEO of the company, while Serena Kern-Libera is the Chief Operating Officer. After reading an article about how space travel is especially damaging to the kidneys, the company applied for a place on the inaugural NASA Space-H Accelerator program, which looks at how medicine can support human deep space missions. And their application was accepted. LinkGevity has developed the blueprint theory of aging, which is a multidisciplinary framework for understanding the development of age-related diseases and deterioration. The theory enables the company's AI to accurately identify and target key biological pathways involved in aging and in deterioration, with necrosis being one of the most critical processes being looked at. So, in this conversation, we'll discuss kidney disease, the blueprint, necrosis, and how the company can help with the space program. And the first voice you will hear in the interview, after mine of course, is that of Serena. So I guess if you could first start by telling me a bit about the origins of the company.
So LinkGevity really was set up out of a realization by Carina and myself that medicine, while it's been able to tackle certain diseases very well, when it came to our grandparents, whom we were both very close to, medicine seemed to just assume that you get to a certain age and then there's a system level collapse. And that was something that both of us wanted to challenge through LinkGevity. So, the reason we set this company up is to tackle age-related multifactorial diseases better. And it's really driven out of that personal experience with our grandparents.
Did you both have backgrounds in biological sciences to do this, or was it a complete leap into the unknown?
We had very useful backgrounds that were quite different from each other. So Carina is actually a very pioneering longevity scientist. My background is law. And we decided, actually, this is a really good combination of skills to set up a business together. So actually being on this journey with my sister is really special.
I think there are so many things as well when you set up a business that you go in with the idea of this is what we're going to do, but then there's all of the other things like the financial side of it. So it's good that there are two of you to share that load, I guess.
Exactly. I think having that companion on a journey, because as you say, there are so many different considerations, hurdles. No doubt there will be further hurdles, but having somebody close to you whom you trust. And I mean, I can say this about Carina without making her blush, but she really is a brilliant scientist and a brilliant leader. And you need that. I think in a startup, what is really important is the vision, and you need to have that vision, but you need to lead other people towards that vision. And I think Carina is really good at doing that. So yeah, I couldn't think of a better person to be on this journey with.
So what's your background, Carina, in this field?
My background started off in biochemistry, and then I moved to genetics and evolutionary biology. I'm probably unique in that I only went into more of the biological sciences and research because of this question about aging. And because, as Serena said, I saw from a very young age this deterioration in my grandparents, and I just could not accept it. And to me, it was, well, surely there's some biology here. It is a biological question. Why isn't it a question we can just resolve and fix? And so I went into the biological sciences and I moved around in the sciences according to where I thought aging or the answer to aging really lay. I started off with biochemistry because I thought, right, let me have a nice broad perspective. And also because there was quite a bit of excitement at the time in terms of the mitochondria and the potential of mitochondria in aging. Later, that shifted slightly, and then there seemed to be more of an answer in the evolutionary space, based on the question of, well, why did aging evolve? Or to put it another way, how did evolution, which is geared towards survival of the fittest, and it's geared towards making us as optimal as possible, arguably, how did that allow for something so negative as aging? So I moved into that side, and really the fruits of what we have today were born in really delving into that space.
In terms of the philosophy, I mean, I think we've all experienced aging of parents, and in your case, grandparents. Is your philosophy to make that transition easier or extend life? What's the goal?
The goal for me in the short term is very simply to not have to see this debilitating decline. And it's to not have to see these horrific age-related diseases that really rob people of their dignity. For me, I think there's a much more immediate need, which is there are debilitating diseases. We need to find interventions to target those diseases. And the way I see it is, why do we have Alzheimer's? Why do we have cardiovascular disease? Why do people die of stroke or heart attacks? Can we intervene?
Do you think that a key to that is early intervention? Because clearly some of the diseases that are associated with aging are from not taking care during the younger years when you think that you're immortal.
I think, yes. Part of the answer certainly lies there. You can accelerate the aging process, but at the end of the day, there is still this aging process that, it seems to be no matter what you do, you will end up with at least some of these diseases. And for me, the key has been, well, why is that? Why is there this inevitability about aging? And is there a way perhaps to not make those diseases inevitable?
I think that's part of what we discovered is, as I said early on, medicine has been really good at treating certain types of diseases, of pathogenic diseases that have a single cause. And if you look at drug discovery, which is what we do ultimately, if you look at drug discovery companies across the board, they still take a very traditional approach typically to discovering therapeutics. So they will focus on a single disease, and then many of them will spend many years trying to find a therapeutic for that single disease. And I think what is unique about us is we're trying to bring in a new paradigm in drug discovery, which is to move away from this focus on single diseases to looking at pathological pathways that are common to multiple diseases. And again, medicine has classified diseases very distinctively. So, cardiovascular disease is very different from kidney disease, for example. And yes, that is useful from a kind of medical textbook perspective, but biology doesn't work that way. All of these things are linked. And that is part of what Carina's new blueprint theory uncovers, is pinpointing these crucial biological, pathological pathways that are key to multiple diseases and link multiple diseases. Because then when you intervene, you're not just intervening in that one condition, you're developing a new class of drug that can intervene in multiple conditions at the same time. And what we hope to do here is usher in a kind of new way of treating these multifactorial diseases.
You mentioned the blueprint. I wonder if you could go into a bit more detail about what that blueprint theory of aging is and how you identify and then target key biological pathways involved in aging and deterioration.
So to give you a high-level overview, the theory, as Serena very much said, the theory looks at diseases through a new lens. It looks at diseases in the context that they might be certain common underlying denominators that are giving rise to these diseases. Now, age-related disease is fundamentally different from diseases you get early in life, such as infectious disease, where typically there's one underlying driver of the disease. So you take your tuberculosis or, the common cold, there's one underlying infectious pathogen giving rise to it. It would be bizarre in a way, and this may help put it into perspective a little. It would be bizarre to say, well, smoking is a risk factor of early life disease, or a high-fat diet is a risk factor of the common cold or early, an infectious disease. Versus with age-related disease, you have several risk factors. The underlying cause, you can't pinpoint one cause. It is multifactorial. There are so many factors at play. How do you deal with such complexity? And what I found with the novel theory is typically later in life, you have the triggering of certain pathological pathways that take place. And this is done in a multifactorial manner. And what the theory allows you to do is identify the most pertinent pathological pathways which are upstream and really lead to these cascades of downstream damage and all of this complexity. And the key is when you find those pathways and then you intervene in those, your chances of success greatly increase.
How are you applying that theory?
So one of the exciting discoveries we've recently made is we've identified one such pathological pathway that is prevalent in 6 out of the top 10 killers today. And it is a pathway that results in irreversible tissue and organ damage. It is a pathway in a process known as necrosis. Now, necrosis comes from the Greek word nekros, meaning death, because it is the ultimate end point of cellular and tissue death. And it is distinct from more beneficial forms of cell death, for instance, apoptosis that might be implicated in wound healing or in cancer prevention. So this is the purely negative, deleterious form of cell death. What we've found is in the past, it was assumed that necrosis is a very chaotic process. It is a multifactorial process. But using our approach, we identified the most pertinent pathological pathway at hand. And when you intervene in that, for the first time, we're able to block 90% of this irreversible tissue and organ damage. And given how fundamental this process is in biology, the applications are vast, to say the least.
Yeah, I think the necrosis example is a really good example of what makes us different and how our drug discovery approach works. Because, like I said before, Jim, we didn't go into this thinking, okay, let's focus on a particular disease. Let's find a therapeutic for that disease. We took a very different approach. We said, let's use the blueprint to focus on a pathological pathway that is key to multiple diseases. And it's funny because necrosis is such a fundamental and a fundamentally detrimental pathway, and yet nobody's heard of it. A layperson, when I came into this, I had to say, oh, Carina, what is necrosis? And I think, again, this kind of demonstrates, in a way, the flawed approach taken to drug discovery at the moment. But when we uncovered a way to block this process, which is a fundamental process, it unlocks applications in so many different areas as well. And I know you'll come to talk about this later, but bioengineering, organoid preservation and formation, organ preservation, and as Carina said, it's also implicated in 6 out of the top 10 killers today. It kind of demonstrates the merit of this new approach, we hope.
In terms of that approach, obviously without giving away any trade secrets, what is your anti-necrotic technology and how does it work on that pathway?
So what we uncovered is during this process of cellular demise, there are 2 fundamental weak spots in your cellular architecture. And this is just due to certain constraints within the system. They are unavoidable weak spots. What our drugs do is, upon stress, they reinforce those weak spots. Hence, when your cell is exposed to stress, it doesn't undergo the same level of collapse. Now, stress here could be a lack of oxygen, it could be inflammation, it could be oxidative stress, moving to stresses outside of Earth and slightly beyond, it could be microgravity stress or cosmic radiation. But the point is, when your cell is exposed to these stressors, these 2 weak spots are key. And they are what in a way result in ultimately the majority of the damage, such that when you do reinforce them, you see this immense protection.
And how does that work further down the pathway? If you are blocking necrosis, what implications are those in treating disease?
The implications are you won't see the same level of irreversible damage. So key to disease is the fact that once severe enough, you have this point of no return. In a way, you ask yourself the question, well, okay, what is this point of no return, right? What is the point you reach where there's no coming back? You cannot recover either the structure of the tissue or the function of the tissue. Your body is no longer able to repair that damage. What is that? What is that point? And you can move beyond it. You can ask yourself, moving just beyond disease, moving even to something that is slightly more of a taboo topic, but moving to, say, even death, right? How do you define death? How do you define the end point of death? What happens? And of course, you've got the clinical death, which is your heart stops beating or you stop breathing, loss of brain function, and so on. But in a way, your tissues and biologically, a lot of the body is still alive. That is why you can do an organ transplant even after somebody is dead. What is the point at which there's no return? You cannot resuscitate a person. You can't use that organ anymore. And if you drill down, you come to necrosis as that point of no return. If you manage to block that, you are able to withstand a lot more stress and make other interventions more likely to work, as well as just prevent the damage that would otherwise take place. So for instance, one of our first interventions is going to be in the space of acute kidney injury. Now, kidney injury, it's an interesting one. I was recently at a space conference and I was trying to get the audience to appreciate the significance of kidney disease and renal disease. And I was thinking of ways to do this, and I finally ended up saying, well, in terms of the US budget, more of the budget goes on treating renal disease and kidney disease than what they spend on the whole of NASA. It's almost twice the budget. So what is kidney disease? Kidney disease is the reason why you have dialysis today. It is the reason why you need a kidney transplant. There is no way to block damage to the kidneys, which are arguably one of the most, if not the most susceptible organs to stress. If you are admitted to a hospital, you have a 25% chance of ending up with kidney disease. And often it is underappreciated because it is a secondary cause of death. So you have something that is an initial problem, say you need surgery. But then the secondary outcome of that, your kidneys being stressed as a consequence of, say, the surgery, that's what ends up doing the majority of the damage or even killing the patient in many instances. Now, we've never been able to block this kidney disease, and hence you still have the problem of dialysis, because it results from necrosis. It results from when there is a stress present, say you're undergoing surgery, you have inflammation, you have a lack of oxygen, all of that hitting the kidney, and you have irreversible damage. What our drugs allow is during, say, surgery, you could give these drugs to patients. You would then prevent that damage such that they could have the surgery and then not have the secondary problem. Their recovery time would be far improved.
Obviously, it's still early days, but in terms of the delivery of those drugs, how would that look? Would that be pill or intravenous or topical or?
So they're small molecules, and in terms of delivery, we actually have a choice. You could give it orally or via an IV route. Obviously, the more trials we undertake, we will identify the best route to administer these for maximum impact for the patient and maximum benefit.
In terms of the work that you've been doing with your anti-necrotic technology and your blueprint, how important has artificial intelligence been in that?
In terms of our differentiator and what makes us different, it is the theory. That is the blueprint theory, and the way we use it to identify new targets is very novel. What AI does is it allows us to apply the theory more quickly to the existing medical literature and hence find previously undiscovered pathways at greater pace. So in a way, AI enables this whole process. It is not the core of the technology. And in fact, one of the problems to date in biology, in particular in the application of AI to biological data sets, is often you just don't have enough data. Where, yes, we have vast numbers of papers and publications and a vast literature, but that is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we know. And the problem is AI only works when you have enough data. And in a way, the blueprint theory allows you to get a good outcome without the need to have all of the knowledge out there. And in fact, it helps you fill in those gaps.
And the benefit for us is it makes it a cheaper process for us. If you were talking, pure financial terms, it means you don't incur the costs that you would if you were applying brute force computing, which obviously requires a lot of compute force and AI. And also, as Carina said, it's a relatively data light approach. So both of those things mean we can be a bit more nimble relative to other companies operating in the same space.
When you first started the company, clearly the motivation for that was based around what you were saying about grandparents. What was the motivation or the turning point for becoming involved in space? I mean, how do you connect those two, and why did you apply for the program, or was it the program that kind of kickstarted that?
So I think for us, obviously, when we uncovered our anti-necrotics, it is a class of drug with so much potential. Now, necrosis, as Carina said, is a huge problem on Earth for a number of different reasons. And it turns out it's actually a big problem in space as well. So we spotted an opportunity, and maybe I'll take you through just some of the applications in space. So the things that companies are now looking at is obviously longer duration space missions. Astronauts, in order to be able to do those long duration space missions, it's not just the technology that you need, but also astronauts who actually man these missions. They will need to be autonomous to some degree because, these are long distances. They're not going to be able to come back to the Earth every time they need something or encounter a new issue in space. So from that perspective, our idea was a lot of the applications that anti-necrotics would be used for on Earth are very much applicable in space too. So if you think about organoid growth and preservation, to date, we have not been able to grow organs in a lab artificially beyond the size of, I think, a pea from a layperson's perspective, because every time you cluster cells into a sphere, the central region gets starved of oxygen, you have a big necrotic core, and nobody has managed to actually overcome that challenge. What we have managed to do with the anti-necrotics is we've got data showing that we can stop those cores from forming up until, I think, about 9 days, and the experiments are still going. That gives you a better chance of getting your vasculature in space into place and allowing for the growth of vastly more complex organoids. Now, that's going to be super useful from an astronaut's perspective because they will have more complex systems to model drugs on, to model new diseases that they might encounter in space. I mean, who knows what's out there? And it will help them to be more autonomous. And of course, from a terrestrial perspective on Earth, being able to grow more complex organoids and hopefully eventually organs on Earth will mean, if you think about it, we will then have better models to test our drugs on without the need, for example, to rely on animal testing. So it's great from a sustainability perspective as well. The other application is cryopreservation. So again, our drugs can be used in cryopreservation. Necrosis is one of the things that inhibits cryopreservation really from working because freeze thawing affects the viability of your cells. We've got some pilot data to show that actually the anti-necrotics can be really useful there as well. Again, from a space perspective, cryopreservation could become really important. And then, of course, kidney injury, which Carina talked about earlier. Massive issue on Earth, affecting about 20% of hospital admissions. But there was also a very interesting article about whether your kidneys would survive a trip to Mars. And I think the answer is at the moment, no, they wouldn't. So, there's potential for our anti-necrotics to help possibly there as well. So yeah, it was just us spotting an opportunity, Jim. And it's obviously space is just a really interesting area anyway.
How did you come to apply for the Space-H program and be accepted for that?
I mean, we found out about the program through a contact of ours. And as I say, when we looked into space travel and what astronauts could face and what could hinder long duration space missions, it just seemed to be such a good fit. And obviously the assessors thought the same. So it is a collaboration between NASA and Microsoft.
So if it comes to potentially bases on the moon and Mars, does that mean that you'll go along with them and set up a biotech cluster in outer space?
I'm scared of getting on an airplane. I'm not sure how I'd feel getting on a spacecraft. But certainly, Jim, it's an interesting question you raise, because for us, at the end of the day, we are a drug discovery company. It is a platform technology, and there's so many different applications here. We had to think long and hard early on about what the most viable business model would be for us. And our aim is, as we develop new therapeutic classes, to license the IP to other businesses. So in essence, it is a B2B model. Of course, we will develop our technology to the right value inflection point, because that makes sense commercially. But ultimately, it's also a way of just making our business a bit more nimble and flexible. Of course, it makes sense commercially, definitely, but it also means that you're able to get your drugs to patients as quickly and as broadly as possible.
Because it's relatively new, there are so many questions about logistics that have to be developed kind of as you go, as opposed to understanding everything beforehand. So I think that that's somewhere that is exciting for a company like yours, because you really have no idea where it's going to go by definition, I guess.
Exactly. Carina has a really nice way of describing us, and she says it's like with the anti-necrotics, it's like discovering a new battery that you can license to a lot of different people. You're not going to make the televisions or the cars or the laptops that the battery goes into, but you've got core technology that will help run all of these things. And the thing to figure out is, well, how do we license this in the most commercial way possible to make sure it gets utilized in the broadest way possible for the good of humanity?
I mean, you may not know all of the companies involved, but are there other biotech companies involved in that space?
There are other similar companies. I can't say too much because of confidentiality, obviously. But there are a lot of exciting other companies, actually. And what is interesting from our perspective is, like I say, we didn't start out thinking we're a space company and space is a sector that we're going to focus on. It just so happened that our technology, which is really useful on Earth, is also really useful in space. So it's great to be able to kind of, sit down with these other companies. Some of them are more focused in the space sector. Majority are focused on space health, as I said, rather than technology. So again, just talking through issues, market, pricing, stakeholders is just really invaluable from our perspective.
You gave a presentation at Space-Comm recently up in Scotland. What was that all about, and how did that go?
That went really well, and I was surprised at the interest, actually, in the area and the topic. The majority of that conference I found was more focused on the tech side. And one of the things I tried to bring there was, well, we've got certain limitations that are going to prevent these long duration space missions. And those aren't limitations on the tech front, they're limitations within our biology. In a way, the technological problems go hand in hand with the biological problems. You need equipment that's going to prevent the problems associated with microgravity or radiation. Or could you come at this from a biological angle? And if you don't have the answer on the technological front, perhaps you can answer it on the biological front. So it was just looking at the potential of our anti-necrotics, where those drugs would be the most useful. And in fact, what was interesting is I had someone come up and say, for our 3D printing, we need to cryopreserve the bioink. Would your technology help us do this? Because it's a big limitation. I mean, at the moment, with cryopreservation, there are two problems. On the one hand, you have to prevent crystal formation. And there we have many solutions. But you also have to prevent the damage to biological material just due to temperature shifts, which is necrosis that arises as a consequence of these temperature shifts. And our technology can block this second problem for which currently there is no solution. And so, yes, it was just fascinating to see all of the different potential applications and the different people coming up and, being interested in the subject.
And also earlier you had mentioned about the potential different methods of delivery to the human body. I guess that's also a part of the equation, because if you're able to give something orally, it removes the necessity for operations in space or having to give IV in space. And the more simple that it is, the easier it becomes to kind of justify and to actually do those trips to space, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, that is one of the reasons why we're interested in the oral route. And also, more of the prophylactic side. Prevention is always better than cure. It's going to be exciting to see exactly what potential these compounds have.
So I guess that leads to the question, where do you go from here on both the work that you're doing terrestrially and also the work in space?
I think for us, the vision is really important. So I go back to what I said right at the beginning, which is why Carina and I set up the company. And it's really to intervene in, or try and intervene in, these multifactorial diseases that ended up taking our grandparents away from us. We're all growing old. We're all likely to get, I think the stats are above the age of 50, at least one multifactorial disease. And then the likelihood of you getting more of these diseases just increases as you get above that age. So it is really to try and intervene in these diseases so that they don't rob us of our dignity as we get older. It is a very new way of thinking, quite a bold way of thinking and disruptive way. But I think, as we're trying to show with our anti-necrotics, which is our flagship therapeutic, it is a way that will bear some fruit. So hopefully we will be able to take this technology to patients. It will do them some good, and we will deliver on that vision.
Do you have a time scale as to when these will be either commercially available or being utilized frequently?
They will have to go through FDA approval, obviously, and MHRA in the UK, and we'll have to go through that process with regulators. But, I think we're on course to get this in doing some good in the next few years. But like I say, the interesting thing about us is it's not just the clinical space that we're operating in. And if you look at tissue engineering and bioengineering, if we can catalyze research that actually ends up saving lives in a different way, because we are able to model diseases better, because we're able to catalyze research that allows for organs to be grown in the lab and deal with some of the issues there, then that's a win from our perspective as well. So it's an interesting time for the company, I think.
In terms of clinical trials, is that something that you'll be doing yourself, or is that the companies that you license your technology to that will be responsible for that?
I think we would do some of the clinical trials ourselves, because although it's a B2B model, we understand the technology better than others, obviously. But also, I think, again, from a commercial perspective, we would want to take it to the highest possible value inflection point that makes sense, and then partner with somebody who can help us actually get this to patients.
With the work you're doing on the space program, how is that being managed? Is that a fixed contract, or how does that work?
Yeah, the space work follows actually the terrestrial application. So the same applications you have on Earth, if you want to put these drugs into astronauts, it needs to go through FDA approval. So actually, it just follows the same course. When you have the applications in the non-clinical sectors, for instance, in tissue engineering, which to a large degree we already have, it's good to go into space as well. And likewise with the clinical side, once you have them fit for human use, that's when it's fit for space as well.
And of course, being on the Space-H program, it's great because we are in touch with the right stakeholders. I don't know, partnerships may come out of that are much more specific to space. But as Carina said, these things can be worked out in parallel, because if it's good to go on Earth, then it's good to go in space as well.
Right. Of course, we're talking about the biology and the logistics of putting people into space, but clearly once this starts happening, there are going to be many different kinds of industries involved in the entire process.
I think space is presenting so many new challenges, but with challenge always comes opportunity. And that's certainly how we see it. And yeah, if our anti-necrotics can help solve some of these challenges, then we're just really keen, like I say, to make sure this technology is able to help.
And I guess breaking news, you just recently received a deep tech grant. Could you tell me a bit about that?
In terms of our growth journey, if you like, Carina and I obviously set up this company last year. We have built a brilliant team since then. We teamed up to begin with 2 serial entrepreneurs who had set up their own health tech business. They sold that to private equity, Greg and Lucas. We joined forces with them, and since then the team has grown. We've got Nicodem, who's our CTO, again, brilliant guy. He was at CERN in Geneva working on really cutting edge AI. And we've got Bill Davies as well. He was a director of scientific operations at GSK. So it's a small team, but it is a growing team. In terms of funding, we've been really lucky because we've had really strong angel backers. So we've just closed, or are closing, an angel round of £1 million, which we've already close to raised 1 million. As we were just discussing, Jim, we've just also had an EU Horizon Deep Tech grant, which is great. I think it's really useful to have the mix of angels who back you, because some of these people bring really deep expertise. We have somebody from OpenAI who invested, and obviously it's great to have that kind of network of support. But the grant funding is obviously it's non-dilutive, which is always helpful from a founder's perspective. This one in particular is really great because it comes with funding, but it also comes with a program that is designed to help the founders. So they will kind of introduce us to the deep tech community in Europe. And there's a program designed really to catapult companies exactly like us amongst the Horizon countries. So it's been a really interesting journey so far. It's had its challenges. I'm sure there will be many more challenges. But when you have the right backing and the right team, then I'm sure we will face those very well together.
Not only with the Space-H, but the Women Tech EU grant.
Yeah, it was a very competitive grant. I think we were one of only 40 companies selected for that grant. It's great recognition and validation that experts in the field have looked at what we're doing. They recognize that this is really unique and could make a big difference. So it's been great from our perspective.
Well, what better than talking not only biotech, but also space? An absolutely fascinating subject, and it's positive to see that discussion moving on from could we and should we go into space to the logistics of actually making it happen. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you'll have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.